In the unforgiving waters of World War II, some of the most devastating naval disasters weren't caused by enemy brilliance alone. They were born from dangerous overconfidence, outdated doctrine, and the arrogance of men who thought steel hulls could outmatch the sky. Few events proved this more brutally than the destruction of Force Z, a proud British fleet sent into battle in December 1941. The mission was meant to intimidate Japan, to project the illusion that Britain could still dominate the seas of Asia. At the center of this force sailed HMS Prince of Wales, a modern King George V-class battleship, and HMS Repulse, a battlecruiser that had seen better decades. 4 destroyers trailed along, meant to provide screening protection. Together, they looked formidable on paper, but in reality, they were a fleet sailing toward annihilation. At this point in history, naval commanders around the world were reluctantly acknowledging a brutal truth. The era of the battleship was ending. Air power, sleek, fast bombers and torpedo planes, was proving itself more decisive with every clash. Yet men like Admiral Sir Tom Phillips clung to the old belief that heavy guns and thick armor could carry the day. Phillips not only dismissed the risk of air attack, but he also refused to request constant air cover from the Royal Air Force. Worse still, he enforced radio silence and sailed without effective reconnaissance. In short, Force Z was blind, deaf, and defenseless against the very weapon that was destined to destroy it. On December 8, 1941, as Japanese forces surged toward Malaya and Singapore, Phillips ordered his fleet to sea, hoping to intercept invasion convoys. But instead of finding Japanese transports, Force Z found itself exposed in the South China Sea, well within striking distance of Japanese land-based bombers. And the Japanese were ready. What followed was not a battle in the traditional sense, it was a massacre from the sky, a strike force of 86 Japanese. Bombers and torpedo planes descended on the British ships like hawks on cornered prey. HMS Repulse fought valiantly, dodging wave after wave of torpedoes, her crew cheering each near miss. But eventually, her luck ran dry. Torpedoes ripped through her hull, flooding compartments, snapping her strength. At 12:33 p.m., the once proud battlecruiser rolled and sank beneath the waves, taking 508 men down with her. The nightmare was only beginning. Less than an hour later, torpedoes slammed into the Prince of Wales. The massive battleship shuddered, listed, and capsized. At 1:20 p.m., she too slipped beneath the surface, dragging 327 sailors into the deep. In the space of one afternoon, Britain had lost 2 capital ships and nearly 840 men. This was not just a defeat, it was a revelation. The destruction of Force Z marked the death knell of the battleship era. Without air protection, even the most powerful ships were nothing but floating coffins. Britain's Eastern Fleet was crippled, and the fall of Singapore just 2 months later became all but inevitable. But here's the haunting question. Was this truly the failure of 2 ships, or the failure of naval thinking itself? Was Force Z doomed the moment it sailed under commanders who believed old doctrines could withstand new realities? If Force Z was a warning, then the Battle of the Java Sea was the brutal confirmation that the Allies had not yet learned how to fight the war they were in. It was February 1942. The Japanese were advancing like a tidal wave through Southeast Asia, threatening the vital Dutch East Indies. To stop them, the Allies scraped together a multinational fleet under the banner of ABDA Command, American, British, Dutch and Australian forces. On paper, it looked like a symbol of unity. In reality, it was a recipe for disaster. Rear Admiral Karel Doorman of the Dutch Navy was tasked with leading this fragile coalition. His fleet included heavy cruisers, Britain's Exeter and America's Houston, along with 3 light cruisers and destroyers drawn from 4 different navies. But unity in name does not equal unity in action. These ships spoke different languages, used different signals, trained with different doctrines, and had almost no experience fighting together. Imagine trying to choreograph a dance where every performer was following a different sheet of music. That was the Allied fleet. Yet, despite these glaring cracks, there was confidence, dangerous confidence. Some believed that superior numbers, bravery, and fighting spirit could make up for the lack of coordination. They were wrong. On February 27th, 1942, Doorman's fleet steamed into the Java Sea to confront the Japanese. What followed was less a contest of equals and more a lesson in how preparation, technology, and doctrine crush bravado. The Japanese sailed in with a coherent plan, practiced night fighting skills, and armed with a terrifying weapon, the Type 93 Long Lance torpedo. These torpedoes could travel farther, hit harder, and strike faster than anything the Allies had. The battle stretched from daylight into the night, and with every passing hour, the Allied fleet unraveled further. Confused signals left ships firing in the wrong direction, maneuvers broke down. Coordination collapsed. The Japanese exploited every weakness. Their destroyers loosed waves of long lances, slamming into Allied ships with devastating precision. By the time the battle ended, it was not just a defeat, it was a slaughter. 5 Allied warships, Courtenay, Electra, Jupiter, De Ruyter, and Java, were sent to the bottom. Admiral Doorman himself went down with De Ruyter, a captain who chose to share the fate of his men. In total, about 2,300 sailors were lost in a single desperate day. The survivors, battered but alive, limped away, only to meet doom days later when Houston and Perth were sunk in the Sunda Strait. The dream of Abda command shattered with those ships. The Allied attempt to defend the Dutch East Indies was over. Japan's road to Java and beyond lay wide open. But here's the bitter truth. It didn't have to end this way. The Allies could have fought a war of attrition, hit-and-run strikes, harassment of supply lines, delaying tactics to bleed the Japanese advance. Instead, they gambled on a decisive fleet action they were never prepared to win. If the Java Sea was a lesson in fractured alliances, then Savo Island was a lesson in complacency, a tragedy written in the ink of overconfidence and unreadiness. The date was the night of August 8-9, 1942. The Allies had just landed Marines on Guadalcanal, hoping to seize and hold the island as a stepping stone in the Pacific. To shield those landings, a powerful screening force of 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 8 destroyers patrolled the dark waters nearby. On paper, it looked like an impenetrable wall of steel. In practice, it was anything but. The seeds of disaster were planted before the first shot was ever fired. The Allied commander, Rear Admiral Victor Crutchley, left his post to attend a conference with Rear Admiral Richmond Turner, leaving no clear leadership behind. It was a fateful absence. Meanwhile, the ships at Savo were scattered, their crews not fully at battle stations. Radar, still new and misunderstood, was badly utilized, its warnings late or ignored. The Allied fleet was strong, but it was also half asleep. Into this gap of leadership and readiness sailed Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa of Japan. His force was not overwhelming in numbers, 5 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and a destroyer. But they carried something more lethal than sheer tonnage. They carried discipline, doctrine, and mastery of night combat. Japanese crews drilled relentlessly for these conditions, and their long-lance torpedoes remained the terror of the seas. Shortly after 1:30 a.m., the calm night erupted. Mikawa's ships, undetected until it was too late, swept into the Allied positions and unleashed hell. Torpedoes carved through the dark waters, exploding with thunderous force against Allied hulls. Gunfire raked decks, setting steel ablaze. Within minutes, chaos reigned. Ships were struck before their crews even understood they were under attack. The result was catastrophic. 4 heavy cruisers, USS Quincy, USS Vincennes, USS Astoria, and HMS Canberra, were sunk in the span of less than an hour. 2 destroyers were battered nearly beyond repair. Nearly 1,100 sailors died, with hundreds more wounded. It was one of the worst defeats in U.S. naval history, a night where fire and steel swallowed men who never had a fighting chance. But perhaps the most shocking part? Mikawa could have gone further. He could have pressed on to attack the vulnerable transports offshore, potentially destroying the entire Guadalcanal landing force. But fearing daylight air attacks, he turned back. In doing so, he spared the Allied Marines ashore, an oversight that would ultimately cost Japan dearly. Still, the sting of Savo Island lingers. It was not simply a tactical defeat, it was a humiliation born of arrogance and lax discipline. The Allies had the numbers, the guns, even radar, but without vigilance, all that strength meant nothing. Long before Savo Island, another navy paid the price for misjudgment and technological arrogance. In March 1941, off the rocky coast of southern Greece, the Italian fleet under Admiral Angelo Iachino sailed with confidence. Their mission was simple: disrupt British convoys and assert control over the Mediterranean. But what began as a bold maneuver ended as a massacre etched into history as the Battle of Cape Matapan. The Italians believed they were chasing an easy prize. Faulty intelligence told them the British had only a small cruiser force in the area. In reality, Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham was waiting with the full weight of the Royal Navy, including modern battleships, equipped with something the Italians did not possess: radar. This single piece of technology would change everything. Radar gave the British eyes in the dark, the ability to track enemy ships long before they were visible to the naked eye. The Italians, still blind to its potential, had no idea just how exposed they were. The opening moves came in daylight. British carrier aircraft harassed the Italians, stinging but not destroying. Then, at twilight on March 28th, a torpedo crippled the heavy cruiser Pola. Here, Iachino made a fateful decision, one that would doom his fleet. Believing Pola could be saved, he dispatched 2 other heavy cruisers, Zara and Fiume, along with destroyers, to provide aid. In doing so, he sent reinforcements straight into a trap, because the British were already closing in. Guided by radar, Cunningham's battleships crept through the night like predators stalking blind prey. When they opened fire, it was point-blank slaughter. Shells the size of cars ripped through Italian hulls. In mere minutes, Zara and Fiume were burning wrecks. The destroyers Vittorio Alfieri and Josue Carducci were obliterated. The crippled Pola was finished off hours later. When the smoke cleared, the Italians had lost 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers. Around 2,300 sailors were killed or missing. Only a few hundred survived, plucked from the sea by both British and Italian rescuers. The Royal Navy, by contrast, suffered negligible damage. It was a one-sided devastation that echoed across the Mediterranean. Why did it happen? The Italians misread intelligence, underestimated British capabilities, and failed to grasp the full power of radar. They sailed with confidence, but confidence without awareness is suicide. A cautious commander might have avoided night action altogether or refused to risk major assets when the situation was unclear. Instead, Iachino walked straight into Cunningham's jaws. Cape Matapan was more than a battle, it was a wake-up call. Technology was rewriting the rules of war, and those who clung to old ways would pay in blood and steel. Of all the naval disasters of World War II, few struck as deeply into the heart of a nation as the destruction of HMS Hood. To the British public, Hood wasn't just a warship, she was a symbol of power, pride, and unbroken tradition. Launched in 1920, she was the largest warship in the world for decades. Sleek and fast, bristling with 15-inch guns. Her very name carried weight. Sailors called her the Mighty Hood. Yet beneath that proud exterior hid a fatal flaw, a flaw everyone knew about, but no one had the courage to fix. Her deck armor was thin, too thin. Hood had been designed in an earlier era when plunging fire from long-range shells was considered less of a threat. By the 1932nd, naval warfare had changed. Guns fired farther, shells arced higher, and plunging fire became deadly. Plans were drawn up to strengthen Hood's protection, but they were postponed again and again. When war came, the pride of the Royal Navy went to sea with an exposed heart. The reckoning came on May 24, 1941, in the frigid waters of the Denmark Strait. The Germans were sending their most feared battleship, Bismarck, into the Atlantic to wreak havoc on Allied shipping. Hood, alongside the brand-new battleship Prince of Wales, was ordered to intercept. For the Royal Navy, stopping Bismarck was more than strategy. It was a matter of honor. At 6 a.m., the two sides clashed. Shells the size of small cars tore through the air, thunder echoing across the sea. Hood's guns roared defiantly, but fate needed only one answer. At 6:01 a.m., a German shell, likely from Bismarck, struck near Hood's rear magazines. What happened next was apocalyptic. The explosion ripped through her core, splitting the ship in two. In less than 3 minutes, Hood was gone. Of her crew of 1,418 men, only 3 survived. It wasn't just the loss of a ship, it was the loss of Britain's pride, witnessed in real time by horrified sailors on Prince of Wales. The Royal Navy had known of Hood's vulnerabilities. They knew she was outdated, exposed, and poorly suited for such a duel. Yet desperation and tradition sent her into battle anyway. Hood's destruction became more than a tactical disaster. It was a national tragedy. Newspapers screamed her loss across front pages, families wept across Britain, and the Royal Navy's aura of invincibility was shattered. But the tragedy carried a lesson written in fire. No amount of prestige can protect outdated steel against modern firepower. In the end, HMS Hood became both a warning and a symbol. A warning that pride and tradition can blind commanders to harsh reality, and a symbol of sacrifice, as her name still echoes in remembrance. And so, across these 5 disasters, Force Z, Java Sea, Savo Island, Cape Matapan and Hood, we see the same pattern repeat: overconfidence, flawed doctrine, and a failure to adapt. The seas of World War II did not forgive mistakes. They punished them swiftly and brutally. Which of these disasters do you think was the most preventable, and which was simply inevitable? Share your take in the comments, and let's see where history divides us.